My name is Clara Whitman, and I am 34 years old. What caught me off guard wasn't just that my family didn't show up, it was that they chose that exact moment, my wedding day, to erase me. I remember standing just outside the venue after the ceremony, the late afternoon sun sinking low and bathing everything in gold. Guests were drifting toward the reception hall, laughter spilling into the air, champagne already being poured. My husband, Ethan, was surrounded by his groomsmen, joking about how the wind kept catching my veil at the worst possible moments. It should have been perfect. That's when my phone buzzed. I assumed it was another congratulations message. Instead, the notification read, "You have been removed from Whitman Family Operations." No explanation, no warning, just gone. For a second, I stared at the screen like it was written in another language. That group chat had existed for 8 years. Birthdays, holidays, emergency business updates, family arguments disguised as jokes. Everything flowed through it. My first instinct was that it had to be a mistake. Maybe Caleb hit the wrong button. Maybe Dad was trying to mute notifications and fumbled. But when I tapped to reopen it, there was nothing. That's when I noticed something else. Their table at the reception was empty. 4 chairs, my mother Elaine, my father Robert, my brothers Caleb and Mark, perfectly aligned, untouched. The waitstaff hovered nearby, checking schedules, whispering about whether they were stuck in traffic. My best friend leaned over and asked if my parents had texted about running late. I shrugged, forcing a smile. I didn't want to ruin the evening. What made it worse was that they had confirmed. Not once, twice. RSVP online, follow-up text a month before. My mother had even agonized over whether her dress would clash with the bridesmaids. Mark asked if his girlfriend could bring a +1, and I said yes, without hesitation. They weren't just expected, they were woven into the plan. The photographer asked if we wanted to wait for family photos. I said maybe later. Then later never came. Eventually, we took the photos without them, and no one said anything out loud, but I could feel the absence like a missing tooth. During dinner, a cousin quietly asked if something had happened between us. I told her I didn't know. That was the truth. I didn't confront it that night. I laughed. I danced. I let Ethan twirl me under the lights like nothing was wrong. But underneath it all, something cold had settled in my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Recognition. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't an accident. And whatever explanation was coming, it wasn't going to be kind. It wasn't until the 3rd day of our honeymoon that the truth finally surfaced. Ethan and I were in Napa, easing into married life with wine tastings and long, quiet mornings that felt like borrowed peace. We'd planned it that way on purpose. No packed itinerary, no rushing, just time to let the adrenaline of the wedding wear off. That morning, we were walking through a vineyard when I opened Instagram out of habit, my thumb moving without thought while Ethan debated between 2 bottles at the tasting bar. And there they were. All 4 of them. My parents, my brothers. Standing barefoot on a beach in Maui, sunburned and smiling, wearing matching floral prints, like they'd coordinated the whole thing weeks in advance. My father had his arm around Caleb, something he never did in photos. My mother was holding a cocktail, laughing at something just out of frame. Mark stood off to the side, grinning like he'd pulled off a prank. The caption read, "The family is finally whole." I didn't feel anything at first. No shock, no rage, just a hollow quiet, like the sound had dropped out of the world. Ethan noticed immediately. He didn't ask questions. He just stepped closer and put his hand on mine, grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed. "They chose this," he said gently. I nodded, still staring at the screen. The timing wasn't accidental. It never was. They hadn't just skipped my wedding. They'd replaced it. I told Ethan I needed to send one message. He handed me his phone without hesitation. I opened WhatsApp. He was still in the family group, and typed a single sentence. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Then I put the phone down. I didn't explain myself. I didn't accuse. I didn't ask why. I knew better than to waste words on people who'd already decided the story they wanted to tell. That afternoon, while Ethan napped, I opened my laptop and logged into the systems I'd built for Whitman Freight Solutions. It wasn't just my father's company, no matter how often he liked to say it that way. I'd spent 6 years modernizing it, bringing everything online, landing the Walmart contract, automating half the logistics pipeline. I was listed as a co-owner, but more importantly, I controlled the infrastructure. And I'd designed it to require dual authorization for transactions over $10,000. My father didn't know how to bypass it. I removed my name from the business registration first. Then I transferred my shares into a holding state that froze them pending review. And finally, I did the one thing I knew would send a ripple through the entire operation. I froze the payroll account. No announcements, no emails, no confrontation. Payroll was due that Friday. I closed the laptop and went back outside, letting the California sun warm my face. For the first time since the wedding, I felt steady, not vindictive, not panicked. Clear. A week later, an unknown number called my phone. I didn't answer. The voicemail came from my father's CPA, his voice tight and careful, asking me to call back as soon as possible. Apparently, the IRS had flagged some discrepancies, missing documentation, and unpaid state tax from 2 years back. And without my credentials, they couldn't access half the records they needed. That evening, the knocking started. I heard it before I reached the door, hard, relentless, the sound of someone who expected it to open because it always had before. I waited. 20 minutes passed. When I finally opened it, my father stood there red-faced and sweating, like he'd sprinted the whole way. "What did you do?" he demanded. I didn't answer right away. I leaned against the doorframe and let the silence stretch. He was expecting me to flinch, to explain, to apologize. Instead, I waited. "You froze the payroll," he said, voice rising. "Do you know what you've done? The drivers are threatening to walk. The warehouse crew hasn't been paid. 2 clients are already talking penalties." I nodded. "Yeah, I know exactly what I've done." Then he dropped the line he thought would scare me. "The IRS called this morning," he said. "They're reviewing 5 years of returns. 5. If you don't fix this, we're all going down." All. I looked at him and realized something simple and devastating. All didn't include the daughter they'd erased on her wedding day. "All," my father repeated, like the word carried weight simply because he said it louder. "We're all going down." I watched his face as he waited for the reaction he'd relied on my entire adult life: fear, guilt, the instinct to fix whatever problem he shoved into my hands. It didn't come. "You removed me from the family chat on my wedding day," I said calmly. "You flew to Hawaii. You posted photos about being whole without me. So no, Dad, all doesn't include me anymore." For the first time since he arrived, his expression shifted, not to remorse, to anger. "You're being petty," he snapped. "You're acting like a child. We built this company together." "No," I corrected. "I built the systems. You built the excuses." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, tossing it onto the floor between us like a challenge. I recognized it instantly. An old partnership clause I'd signed years earlier, buried in early filings when I still trusted him. It gave him limited rights to override financial freezes under specific conditions: negligence, sabotage, intentional harm. He was bluffing, but it was a calculated bluff. "If this goes to court," he said, lowering his voice, "they won't just look at me. They'll look at you too." By Monday, his lawyer sent a cease and desist. By Tuesday, my lawyer responded with a full audit of every decision I'd made since joining the company, including screenshots of issues I'd flagged over the years: misreported expenses, undocumented transfers, vendor payments that never made sense. I didn't send it to hurt him. I sent it to protect myself. I didn't tell Ethan most of it. We'd just gotten back from the honeymoon, and I wanted at least a few days where my family didn't poison our new life. We cooked together. We laughed. We pretended this wasn't happening. Then, on Wednesday, my mother texted for the first time in 2 months. "Can we please talk? This is getting out of hand." No apology, no explanation, just a soft reach, like a hand extended after shoving someone off a ledge. I didn't reply. The next day, the CPA called me directly. Not my father, not my mother, me. He told me the IRS wasn't just looking at the business anymore. They were looking at personal finances too. Offshore accounts, a fake vendor, something tied to Caleb, and the part that made my stomach drop: my father had used my digital signature on several documents I had never seen. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I still had access to the backup server, the one I'd built for transparency. Every email, every contract, every invoice stored there automatically. Without my password, no one could access it. I didn't delete anything. I just locked it. That evening, my Aunt Jody texted, "Your dad's spiraling. The IRS called again. Caleb hasn't slept. Your mom's freaking out." It didn't feel satisfying. It felt inevitable. Then came the knock. My father again. Same suit, hair disheveled. He shoved another envelope at me, filled with printed emails, out-of-context messages, Half conversations, attempts to make it look like I'd orchestrated things. He leaned in close, voice low. "If the IRS sees this wrong," he said, "they won't just come after me. They'll come after you." "Good luck," I said. "You altered the numbers, not me." That's when he tried something new. He mentioned the wedding. Barely. A half sentence about how it was a bad time, how they needed space, how maybe we could move past it. It was too little, too late. "You burned the bridge," I told him. "Now you're mad the fire spread." He left without another word. The next morning, I got an email from the company's legal counsel. My father was trying to offload shares in a panic sale. He couldn't. My name was still tied to every major asset. And then came the email I didn't expect, from Uncle Grant. He'd been pushed out of the business years ago, labeled incompetent, unstable. His message was short. "I heard what's happening. I was waiting for someone to finally see it. If you want the whole picture, meet me." I almost ignored it. Ethan didn't let me. We met at a diner 2 towns over. Grant slid a manila folder across the table before our coffees arrived. Inside were bank transfers, shell companies, and a buyout agreement that made my stomach churn. He hadn't been removed for incompetence. He'd been paid to stay silent. Because he'd discovered the fraud. I scanned everything, backed it up, and left. By Sunday, the IRS froze not just the business accounts, but my parents' and brother's personal ones too. All pending investigation. My phone filled with missed calls. Silent panic. That night, my mother showed up at our door. She asked to come in. She said she didn't know the full story, that she never agreed to skip the wedding, that Dad convinced her it would be less tense. She cried when I told her about the Hawaii photo. Then she said the words that ended everything. "We know about the emergency fund." I stood up. "That money is not yours," I said. "You left me on my wedding day. I owe you nothing." She begged. She threatened. She left. The next morning, I sent everything to the IRS. And then I closed my laptop and took Ethan out for brunch. Let it burn. The news broke 3 days later. Ethan was the one who saw it first. He was scrolling through his phone while I was rinsing dishes, and he went very still in that way people do when they don't want to alarm you, but already know they should. "Clara," he said carefully, "you might want to see this." The headline sat there in plain black text, unemotional and devastating. "Family-owned freight company under federal audit for multi-year tax irregularities." They didn't name names yet. They never do at first. But anyone local who had ever heard the Whitman name knew exactly who it was about. Comments were already piling up underneath the article. Some shocked, some unsurprised. A few from former employees who'd always suspected something was off but never had proof. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not relief, not satisfaction. Finality. Within hours, messages started coming in. Not demands this time, not accusations, just quiet check-ins from people who'd worked with me over the years. Warehouse supervisors, drivers, a former operations manager who'd quit suddenly 2 summers ago. They all said some version of the same thing. "We always wondered why you left. Now it makes sense." My father didn't call. Neither did my brothers. They didn't need to. Their accounts were frozen. All of them. Business and personal. The IRS hadn't just shut the door. They'd locked it from the outside and swallowed the key. Payroll wasn't the only thing halted now. Mortgages, credit cards, lines of credit. Everything was under review. That afternoon, the IRS emailed me directly. Not a demand, not a threat, a request. They wanted copies of the archived records. The server I'd locked. The one no one else could access. The emails, contracts, vendor invoices, approval logs. The digital paper trail I'd designed years ago because I believed transparency protected everyone. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I told them I'd provide everything. That evening, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered this one. It was my mother. She didn't cry at first. She tried reason. Said she hadn't understood what my father and Caleb were doing. Said she thought the business issues were technical. That the Hawaii trip was supposed to be a reset. That she never meant to hurt me. I let her talk until she ran out of breath. Then she changed tactics. She told me they couldn't access money for groceries, that the credit cards were declined, that my father hadn't slept, that Caleb was having panic attacks. She said the company we built together was going to be destroyed if I didn't help them clean it up. Then she said something that made my hands go cold. "Your father knows about the emergency fund," she said. "He thinks that money should be put back into the business. You wouldn't have it if it weren't for the company." The emergency fund. The separate account Ethan and I had built slowly, quietly, deliberately. The one not tied to the business. The one meant to protect our future. How? I asked slowly. Does he know about that? She hesitated. He still has access to some of the old banking records from when you had joint authorization, she said, like it was a reasonable explanation. Like entitlement was logic. I stood up. That money is ours, I said. And you don't get to touch it. She begged then. Actually begged. Said this would ruin the family. Said my father would go public and accused me of orchestrating everything if I didn't cooperate. Said people would believe him. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. You left me out of the family on my wedding day, I said. You smiled for photos and said you were whole without me. This is the consequence of that choice. She went quiet. I'm sending everything to the IRS, I added. Every file, every backup, everything Uncle Grant gave me. She hung up without another word. The next morning, I did exactly what I said I would. I submitted the archive. Every email, every invoice, every approval chain, every shell vendor, every altered contract. And then I closed the laptop. The fire didn't need me anymore. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers, like ash settling after a fire you can't see anymore. 3 days after I sent the archive, the IRS emailed again. This time it wasn't a request, it was a confirmation. They acknowledged receipt of the records and thanked me for the completeness of the documentation. The phrasing was formal, clinical, but one line stood out. Your cooperation materially advanced the scope of the investigation. I read it twice, then once more aloud to Ethan, who nodded and squeezed my hand like he'd been waiting for that sentence to exist. That afternoon, the local news updated the story. Names were still withheld, but the language sharpened. Criminal investigators, shell vendors, offshore accounts. The comments turned from speculation to recognition. People started connecting dots. Former employees shared posts quietly. Vendors who'd been paid late or short added their own stories in careful, measured tones. No one said my name. They didn't need to. My father tried one last time. It wasn't a call, it wasn't a message, it was a package. A thick envelope arrived by courier with no return address. Inside was a draft complaint from his attorney accusing me of breaching fiduciary duty, sabotaging the company, and causing emotional and financial harm. It was dramatic, overwrought, and carefully vague, designed to scare, not to win. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my attorney, who replied with 2 sentences. They're posturing. Let them exhaust themselves. That was the last legal threat. A week later, I heard from Caleb. An email. Subject line. Please read. It wasn't long. It wasn't eloquent. It was messy and scared and honest, in the way people get when the ground disappears under them. He admitted he'd set up the fake vendor accounts at our father's direction. That mom knew more than she ever let on. That the pressure to keep the money flowing had turned into a machine no one could stop. He said he was sorry about the wedding. Said he knew I'd never forgive him. Said if the attachment helped, maybe it would matter. There was a flash drive taped inside the envelope. I didn't open it on my main laptop. I used a throwaway machine and watched the files populate. Emails, voice memos, spreadsheets, even short video clips. One had my father laughing on a call with someone overseas saying, "She signs whatever I put in front of her." Another showed him explaining to Caleb how to split payments to stay under banking thresholds. It was airtight. I sent everything to the IRS with a short note. Additional materials you may find relevant. Then I deleted the email thread and took Ethan to dinner. We moved 3 months later. Out of state, new town, new routines. I started consulting privately again, on my terms. Ethan went back to teaching and found a school that felt like a community instead of a grind. Our days got quieter. Mornings lingered. We cooked more. We laughed, actually laughed, without scanning our phones for the next emergency. A few relatives stayed in touch. Aunt Jody sent postcards. Uncle Grant checked in once, then faded back into his own life. Everyone else went silent, which was its own answer. Nearly a year passed. Every so often, a spammy-looking letter would show up from a law firm, or a distant cousin would send a cautious, "How are you doing?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The chapter had closed itself. Then, 6 days after I thought it was truly over, I got one more email from the IRS. Not a notice, not a demand. A thank you. One of the senior agents wrote to acknowledge the value of the materials I'd provided. They said the records led to the discovery of additional offshore accounts tied to fraudulent vendor payments, that the scope had widened, that subpoenas were being issued. The email ended with an unexpected line. Based on our review, we believe you were unaware of these activities at the time. Your cooperation may assist in building the broader case. I set the phone down and stared out the window for a long time. That night, Ethan and I sat on the porch as the sky darkened and the breeze rolled in. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Whatever they had tried to turn my wedding day into, whatever they thought they could take, was gone now. Not because I destroyed it, but because I stopped protecting a lie that wasn't mine to carry. I don't miss them. I miss the version of them I thought would show up when it mattered. That version never did. What survived wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. And with it, a life that finally belonged to us.